الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على المبعوث رحمة للعالمين وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن والاهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين وبعد. قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في القرآن المجيد بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والكاظمين الغيظ والعافين عن الناس والله يحب المحسنين. قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه إن رجلا قال لرسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أوصني ولا تكثر علي، قال لا تغضب، أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. Honorable ulama, beloved brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Indeed, all praises are due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We praise Him and send blessings and salutations on Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Alhamdulillah, we have heard very beautiful words from the brother before. Just to expound on this a little. There are two driving forces behind man which cause him to sin. And those two driving forces are amongst the illnesses of our heart. One of those is anger, and the other is lust. Lust meaning ash-shahwa. If we learn to control these two driving forces, then inshallah our lives will become very easy. And if we learn to control one of the two, then 50% of our lives will become very easy. Now, anger is such a thing which is instinctive, which is innate in every human being. And it is something which is needed. If we did not have anger, we would not be able to protect ourselves. If we did not have anger, we would not be able to protect our family, our children, etc. If we were on the battlefield, for example, if something happened where we were in danger, if an animal was to attack us, we would need this anger to be able to defend ourselves. But it is unfortunate that most people, be they from any faith, any caste, any religion, most people cannot and do not control this anger that they have inside them. And we find many people have to go for anger management courses. This is how bad the condition of anger is around the globe. And even in the past 1 or 2 weeks, there's been headlines on the news regarding sports personalities who many look up to and regards their anger. So anger is such a thing which, as I said, is in every single one of us. So now, what do we do? How do we control this anger? What does Islam tell us about anger, and what is the anger management solutions and advice given to us by the Quran and the Sunnah? The verse I recited before you at the beginning, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, وَالْكَاظِمِينَ الْغَيْظَ وَالْعَافِينَ عَنِ النَّاسِ وَاللَّهُ يُحِبُّ الْمُحْسِنِينَ, which means those who control their anger, وَالْكَاظِمِينَ الْغَيْظَ, meaning control your anger, وَالْعَافِينَ عَنِ النَّاسِ, and forgive people. وَاللَّهُ يُحِبُّ الْمُحْسِنِينَ, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves those who forgive and who are good, the muhsineen. Now in this verse there are three components. The first is كَاظِمِينَ الْغَيْظَ, to control one's anger. Now to control one's anger is easier said than done, as I'm sure many of us know. For those sitting in front of me, young men and middle-aged men, I'm sure many of us are in positions where we may have family, we may have wives, children, sisters, nephews and nieces. And there may be times where they may irritate us. And then we get angry, and we are in a position where we can vent our anger and we can put them in their place. But the Quran is telling us, كَاظِمِينَ الْغَيْظَ, control your anger. Now the meaning of this word, كَاظِمِين, Allama Alusi rahimahullah in the tafsir of Ruh al-Ma'ani, which is a very beautiful tafsir and commentary on the Quran, he mentions that this word means شَدُّ رَأْسِ الْقِرْبَةِ عِنْدَ امْتِلَائِهَا, which means to tie a water sack when the water is overflowing. So when this overflow is happening, to quickly tie it up so the water stays under control. So in the same way, when the anger is boiling up and overflowing in our body, we need to tie a knot on top of it and keep it under control. The second component of the verse, وَالْعَافِينَ عَنِ النَّاسِ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, is telling us with regards one who forgives people. So even though you are angry, even though a problem has occurred, you control that anger, and then on top of controlling that anger, you forgive that person. Look at the beautiful advices of the Quran. To manage to control your anger, number one. And then number two, you forgive that person who has made you angry. And this is not something easy. And then the third part of the verse. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us, وَاللَّهُ يُحِبُّ الْمُحْسِنِينَ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves those who do good. So you have controlled your anger. For example, your child has made you angry. He has not listened to you. He has come home. He keeps on coming home late, for example. And now he is getting you angry. And you as the child are also getting angry at your father. But now the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is to control your anger. This does not mean that you allow your child to do this. What this means is, when you are speaking to your child, or at that time when that anger is overpowering you, then if you want to tell your child something, if you want to scold or reprimand your child, then do not do it out of anger. You should wait until your anger has calmed down and then speak to him when you are level-headed. Why? Because when you are angry, you will say things or you may do an action which you may regret. So control your anger. وَالْعَافِينَ عَنِ النَّاسِ, and forgive that person. So you give your child a chance. وَاللَّهُ يُحِبُّ الْمُحْسِنِينَ, and do good to them. So first of all, he made you angry, but you control that anger. On top of that, you forgive that person. And then the third thing you do is be good to that person. So imagine now, your child will be thinking that my father, although he's angry with me, he has overlooked my wrong. And on top of that, the father did something good for the son. Or he advised him in a good way. Or he came to an agreement that, oh my son, if you do this, then I will do this for you. There's some compromise, some give and take. Not just an overpowering authoritative figure where I am your father, you have to do as I say, stamping his feet. But instead he earns that respect. And how is he earning that respect? By following the command of this verse, by following the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And by controlling this anger, there's a lot of virtue mentioned in the hadith. There's a very famous hadith mentioned in Tirmidhi, when Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says, Man qadama ghaydan, that whoever controls his anger. Man qadama, again the same word is used as the word in the Quran. Man qadama ghaydan, wa huwa yastati'u an yanfadahu. And one who controls his anger, whoever controls his anger, and he's in a position where he can vent this anger. wa huwa yastati'u an yanfadahu, that he could vent this anger and he could take action on this person. Da'ahu Allahu yawm al-qiyamah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will call him on the day of Qiyamah. So he has controlled his anger, even though he was in a position where he could have did something and where he could have made his point. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will call him on the day of Qiyamah, ala ru'usil khala'iq, in front of all the people. In front of all the people. Hatta yukhayyirahu fi ayyi al-huri sha', until this person will be able to choose from any hur which he wills. Look at the virtue of just controlling your anger. And now the women folk may think that what do we get if we control our anger? So on the exploration of this hadith, the muhaddithun the muhaddithin, the specialists in ahadith, they mention that this is a kinaya, this at the end of this hadith, meaning that this person will definitely enter Jannah. And idkhalihi al-jannatil mani'a, that this person will enter Jannah and the highest ranks of Jannah. Wa isalihi darajatil rafi'a, meaning this person will enter the highest ranks of Jannah also. So this is referring to both men and women. So just by a simple, well, I shouldn't say simple, but by controlling your anger, this is one of the beautiful virtues which we could receive. In another hadith of Nabi Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which has very similar wording, man kadhama ghaydan wa huwa yaqdiru ala infadihi. Very similar words. One who controls his anger, or whoever controls his anger, and again he's in the position where he could vent this anger, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will fill his heart, mala'ahu Allahu qalbahu amnan wa imanan. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will fill his heart with iman and with amn and iman. Amn meaning peace and security and tranquility. So two very beautiful ahadith just by simply controlling your anger. Now, we've heard this verse, and we have verses many a times. We attend talks, we may read books, we may see shows, etc., listen to programs. But when we hear these verses, do they actually affect our heart? That is the question we need to ask ourselves. If we look in the lives of the Sahaba, when a verse was recited before them, it would affect them in such a way that they would act upon it immediately. They wouldn't wait till tomorrow, they wouldn't wait till they're 50, they wouldn't say, oh, give me another 30, 40 years, I need to enjoy my life. This mentality is in everybody, whether it's to do with religion, whether it's to do with our deen, whether it's to do with dunya. Even the worldly aspect, many people's mentality is, let me study now, let me work now, I will save up, then I will invest, once I make 1 or 2 million, then I will relax, then I will enjoy my life. So from the time you are born till the time you make your million, is that not part of your life? Every day which is passing by is part of your life. So whether it's a worldly aspect or a religious aspect, meaning deen, but for us, our deen and dunya is together. So you do not wait and think, oh, I'm still studying, let me have my fun. I can see a person here and there, go for a date on the weekend, or go out on the weekends. Let me wait till I'm married, maybe have a few children, then I'll start praying my salah. Then I will wake up for my fajr salah. But by then, you have already continued in your actions for the last 20, 30 years. How can you expect to change with a click of a finger? Do you think just by saying, nakahtuha wa qabiltuha, everything is going to change? Do you think just by accepting someone's hand in marriage, your life is going to change just like that? These habits which we have in us, as they say in English, bad habits die hard. And this is a very true saying, because we know something which we are habituated to is very hard to take out. So if we have a habit of something for 20, 25 years, 30 years, 35 years, it would not be easy to just take it out when we hit old age, or when we reach old age. And if you do not believe me, ask those who are older than you. So going back to this verse, when these verses were mentioned in front of the Sahaba, they would immediately act upon it. Under the same verse in Ruh al-Ma'ani, Allama Alusi rahimahullah, it mentions the story of Hussein bin Ali radiallahu anhu, who was the son of Hazrat Ali radiallahu anhu, the great Khalifa from the Khulafa Rashidun. So Hussein radiallahu anhu was performing wudu, and he had a servant, young lady, who was pouring the water for him as he was doing wudu. And now the utensil which was being used, she accidentally dropped it on his head, and it bumped his head to an extent where it actually made his head swell up a little. You know when you get a small bruise and then slowly it just expands. So when that happened, he turned around and gave her a very stern look, and a sharp and angry look, because it got him angry. Now this young lady who was a servant was also very intelligent. She knew the effect of the Quran on the Sahaba. So immediately she recited this verse. And then she mentioned, and she said, وَالْقَاضِمِينَ الْغَيْرِ, regarding those who control their anger. So then he replied, قَدْ قَضَمْتُ غَيْدِي, that indeed I have controlled my anger. Immediately. Now just think of this for 1 second. If someone gets us angry and we are boiling, what is our immediate reaction? Even if they say something to us, we'll say something worse. And we'll probably use foul language at the same time. But immediately when the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was mentioned in front of Hussein radiallahu anhu, he said, قَدْ قَضَمْتُ غَيْدِي. He replied immediately saying, indeed I have controlled my anger. But obviously, as we know, the verse doesn't finish there. So she says, وَلَعَافِينَ عَنِ النَّاسِ, and we know the translation. So he said, قَدْ عَفَوْتُ عَنْكِ, that I have forgiven you. That I have forgiven you. Now picture this for a second. He is very angry just 2 seconds ago. Now the verse was mentioned, he has controlled his anger. And now he's taken it a step further, just to act on the Quran and make amal on the verses which was recited before him and the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He forgave her. قَدْ عَفَوْتُ عَنْكِ. And then she went on, وَاللَّهُ يُحِبُّ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves those who do good. The muhsineen. So what was his response? I free you for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I free you for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So moments ago he was angry. Moments ago he was angry. And a few minutes later, this servant and slave girl was free. So look at the way the Sahaba acted on the verses of the Quran. So what we need to ask ourselves is, when these verses are mentioned to us, do we even think of them at the time of anger? Do we even think this is an illness inside us? Do we even think that this anger could be very detrimental for me? Because through anger, it can result in many things. It can result in us being jealous of other people. It could result in us harboring hatred and malice in our hearts. You do not want to see others prosper. If you see someone else doing better than you, if he got better grades than you, or she got better grades than you, or he or she is on a better salary, or you think outwardly living more lavishly than you, and maybe having things which you desire or aspire towards, then this anger will boil up and boil up and boil up to an extent where you will just torture yourself. And you will torture yourself, and this malice and hatred will get you nowhere. So we should use these examples of the lives of Sahaba and the stories of Sahaba, wherein they would act immediately. Another very famous hadith regarding Abu Mas'ud radiallahu anhu. Now, Abu Mas'ud radiallahu anhu, an incident occurred and he became very angry. So he began to hit his servant. And the hadith goes, كُنْتُ أَضْرِبُ غُلَامًا لِي, that I was hitting a servant of mine. فَسَمِعْتُ مِنْ خَلْفِي صَوْتًا, then I heard a noise from behind me, a sound, a voice from behind me, saying, اِعْلَمْ أَبَا مَسْعُودٍ, that, oh Abu Mas'ud, know, اِعْلَمْ, very well, know very well, لَاللَّهُ أَقْدَرُ عَلَيْكَ مِنْكَ عَلَيْهِ, that know that indeed, لَاللَّهُ, indeed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is more powerful than, has more power than you. Indeed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has more power than the power you have over this slave. Does everyone understand? Indeed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has more power than the power you have over this slave of yours, or this servant of yours. So Abu Mas'ud radiallahu ta'ala anhu further goes on to explain, فَالْتَفَتُّ, so I turned around. فَإِذَا هُوَ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ, and all of a sudden he saw that this was the beloved messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, who was telling him this. Then what did he do and what did he say? هُوَ حُرٌّ لِوَجْهِ اللَّهِ, هُوَ حُرٌّ لِوَجْهِ اللَّهِ. He said that I free this slave for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wa sallam didn't finish there. He said, لَوْ لَمْ تَفْعَلْ, if you did not do this, لَلَفَحَتْكَ النَّارِ أَوْ قَالْ لَمَسَّتْكَ النَّارِ, if you did not do this, then indeed you would have been burning in the fire, meaning an-nar, the fire of Jahannam. And this is a Sahabi. This was the state of a Sahabi. When Nabi Karim Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, because of this oppression that you were doing, if you did not forgive this person and free him, then Allah subhanahu, you would have had to see the repercussions and the results of this on the day of Qiyamah and in Jahannam. So what would be our condition? If this was the condition of a Sahabi, what would be our condition? So we need to first and foremost realize that anger can be a problem. That anger can be a problem, and it can also be a means of more problems occurring. If we do not control our anger, we may say things which we regret. We have many people come to us and complain regarding their spouse. Some regards their husband, some regards the wife. That, oh, my husband is like this, or my wife is like this. And one of the main reasons behind it is the fact that the husband does not control his anger. And for small and silly petty issues, there's not enough salt in the food. There's not enough salt in the food, the husband begins to scream and shout. Whereas 5 minutes ago he was outside with his friends relaxing and joking around and smiling. As soon as he walks in the house, this new person just comes into him, where he's the main man in the house and everything he says has to happen. Why can you not have that same relationship at home that you have with your friends? And the same goes for the youngsters. Many youngsters, when they're with their friends, or with their boys as they like to call it, they are very happy and merry-making and driving around and going here and there, doing this and that, which we don't want to go into. And as soon as they come in their house, before their mum, first of all, you don't even make salam when you go into the house. So of course shaitan is going to be with you. And then as soon as your mother asks or your father asks, where have you been? Why are you always asking me the same question? What's your problem? Well, literally a minute ago, before you opened the door, you were happy. So this anger we need to control. But we also need to remember that there's shaitan behind every single one of us. And shaitan will always poke us and always whisper in our hearts. الَّذِي يُوَسْوِسُ فِي صُدُورِ النَّاسِ. And he will want us to have good ties with our friends. Why? Because when we have all this happy and merry-making with our friends, then one thing will lead to another and will most likely lead into sin, which will make shaitan happy. And when we get home with our parents, he will make us angry, make us fight. Why? Because this also will lead into sin. And when family ties break, shaitan is never happier. Shaitan loves it when family ties break. Be they husband and wife, be they brother and sister, be they two brothers over a business transaction, be they cousins. So we need to keep all of these things in mind. So just from this one verse, you can see how much detail and how much tafsir and how much commentary can be given just on these few words, and how much problems it can resolve. Now, as I said at the beginning, the two driving forces behind sin, one is anger, the other is lust, ash-shahwa. Now if we follow our carnal desires, our nafs, following our carnal desires will make us lead into sin. Now following your desires, obviously the sins are many. To go into detail of all of them will take very long. But I'm sure you all know what I'm talking about. But if we were to carry out any of these acts and follow our desires, then we will be breaking the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We will be breaking the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But when we break any law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then inshallah, with the will of Allah, we can make tawbah. And we have hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive us. We have hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive us. But now this second force, this second driving force, which is anger, is such a thing which we will break the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, yes, but we will also be stamping on the huquq and the rights of our fellow human beings. we will also be stamping on the rights of our fellow human beings. So because of our anger, we now abuse somebody, we now were violent against somebody, we had road rage, for example, which many of us are guilty of. On the road, somebody just flashed us from behind or somebody hooted, that's it. We will chase them until we track them down to the red light, get out of the car and start jumping and screaming. What will this result in? It will result in nothing except something which you will regret. So now this anger will definitely stamp on somebody's huquq, on somebody's rights. Now when it comes to huququllah and huququl ibad, remember one thing very clearly. If you break huququllah, a right of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we have hope He will forgive you, because of the many verses enumerated in the Quran. But when you stamp on the rights of huququl ibad, on the rights of humans, of banda, of servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you will need to ask forgiveness from that person. And if you do not ask forgiveness from that person, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not forgive you. And if you do not get forgiveness from that person, then that person will come knocking on your door on the day of Qiyamah, saying, give me back my rights. So this is not something small. Anger is a very serious issue, and something which we need to keep under control. In the time of Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, he was a very famous jurist, which I'm sure many of us have heard of. He was very popular in his time. He was very popular. So, as you know, the more popular you get, the more people become jealous of you, or the more problems you get in the general public. So Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah was walking along the street, and another man who didn't really like him came near him and started making bad remarks, started swearing, started rebuking him, started saying this and that. Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah said nothing. He just carried on walking. This man carried on walking behind him and swearing and saying this and that. Imam Abu Hanifa still said nothing. Then they got to a corner, a junction, where the house of Imam Sahib rahimahullah was this way, and the other man was going to go the opposite direction. Now look at the qualities of our pious predecessors. He stopped at the corner of the street and he said, say whatever you want to say, because now we are going to part ways. That's all he replied to him. Say whatever you're going to say, because I am going this way and now you are going to part the other way. Now you imagine if somebody was doing that to us. If somebody was walking behind us and swearing and saying this and that, what would be our reaction? Now don't get the wrong message. That doesn't mean if somebody is swearing at us, then we just, look down and carry on walking. We don't have to do that. But we need to control our anger. Do not do something which we will regret. The key point here is when you're at that height of anger, do not act on that anger. Do not think and act on your emotions. Think with your brain. There's a very big difference. Because at the height of your emotion, when your anger is high, you will definitely do things which, when you're out of your mind, you won't know what you're doing, out of control, and then you'll regret it. And the next thing you know, you'll be in court getting charged for whatever the charges are, GBH for example. But if we just control our anger at that beginning stage, and then at a later stage when we are a bit calm, then we try to sort out the problem, there will definitely be much more benefit. There was another man in the time of Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah. Him and his friend, they were up to mischief. And his friend was saying, another very famous scholar, Sufyan al-Thawri rahimahullah, is the most patient man around in our town. And he's the best from all the ulama, from all the jurists. He is the most patient and the most forbearing. And this was what they were talking about. And the other from the two, the other friend, he said, I want to test Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah. I'm going to test him and see how patient he actually is. So it was well known around in the town that at the time of Qaylula, which is a sunnah time to take rest in the afternoon, which we call siesta, that Imam Sahib used to rest. That was his resting time. And he had an allotted time for the people to come and ask questions if they had any problems, this and that. He would give the rulings, etc. But the afternoon time, everyone knew we don't go disturb him, because that's the time which he rests, because he stays awake the whole night, sorting out problems and doing mutala'ah of kitabs, research, extensive research, and etc. So everybody knew. But now these two young boys or two young men were up to mischief. So one of them, he waited until Imam Sahib went into his house, and he used to live, it is mentioned in the book, it was a double story. So he went upstairs and he lied down to rest. Now, as soon as he lied down to rest, this man came knocking on the door. He came knocking on the door. Now, despite the fact that everybody knew that you shouldn't be knocking on Imam Sahib's door at this time, he still knocked. So Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah came downstairs, even though he was just about to rest. He came downstairs, he opens the door. Then he does salam, and this young man says, "Sir, I have a question for you." So Imam Sahib says, "Go ahead," even though that wasn't the time to ask questions. He said, "Go ahead." Then he scratches his head, says, "Oh, sorry, I forgot what the question was." So Imam Sahib says, "It's okay, when you remember then you can come back." So Imam Sahib went back upstairs, he lied down again. This young man came and knocked on the door again. So Imam Sahib comes down a second time. And he opens the door, he sees the same young man there. He says, "How can I help you?" He says, "I have a question for you. I remember what the question is now." So Imam Sahib says, "Okay, what's the question?" Then he goes, "Oh, sorry, as soon as when you were coming down the stairs, I must have forgotten. It just slipped my mind." Now think of this for a second before I carry on the story. He came downstairs twice. He opened the door twice. And this young man said the same thing twice. And he could already see that this young man was just up to mischief. Yet he didn't vent his anger, even though he was a very popular man in the society, he was a very respected person. He didn't vent his anger at all, he controlled his anger. Nevertheless, closed the door, went back upstairs, lied down again. Now this young man came the third time. He comes the third time, knocks on the door. Imam Sahib comes downstairs in his resting time. He opens the door once again, he sees the same young man. So the young man says, "I remember the question." So Imam Sahib says, "Go ahead." Now you would have thought that it would at least be a decent question, regards a ruling, regards some law, maybe some, I don't know, a marital problem, a social issue, domestic problem. What does he ask? He asked that, is the excreta, meaning the feces of man, sweet or sour? Is it sweet or sour? Now look at the question. This is the most inappropriate question someone can ask you. And he's not just asking a normal person, he's asking probably the most respected and well-learned and knowledgeable person around at the time. You can imagine if one of our if somebody come into the masjid and asked him this kind of question, he would probably chase him with a stick. Say, "Get out of the masjid." But Imam Sahib rahimahullah, look at the qualities they had, because they had Quran and Hadith, the Sunnah in their life. Although he knew that this man is just asking this question for no reason, and he has some ulterior motives, he replied, and this is after 3 times of going up and down the stairs and breaking his whole rest time. He says to him that when the excretion or excreta, feces, whatever you want to call it, is fresh, then it is sweet, and when it dries up a bit, then it is sour. Okay? Does anyone understand that answer? Yeah, I'm getting a few nods. So then this young man replies, "How do you know? Have you tasted it?" He replies to him, "How do you know? Have you tasted it?" Now just think if someone is saying that to us. So after all of this, even though all of this happened, Imam Sahib says that it is not something which you need to taste, it is just by observation. Because in those days, if I'm not mistaken, they would go to they didn't have bathrooms or lavatories attached to their houses. They would go somewhere to relieve themselves. So in those areas, and obviously they never had a sewage system like we have, and pipes running through the water, etc. It was just done in a pit or a hole somewhere or a bucket. You know what I'm trying to say? It's still like that in some parts of the world today. So he said, it's just by observation that when somebody has just passed or relieved himself, you will see a lot of flies infested around it. And once it has dried up a bit, you see the flies have gone away. So he gave this person this answer. Now this young man was just stumped and dumbfounded. And he said to him, "Oh Imam Sahib, I cannot believe the answer you have given me. I was expecting you to get angry and chase me away from your door and chase me up the street. But instead you have actually given me a logical answer for the most, I don't want to use the word, but for a ridiculous question or hideous question." So even then he was won over by Imam Sahib, and then he went back to and then he explained to Imam Sahib the whole reason why he was doing what he was doing. And he said, "Oh Imam, you are definitely the most patient and the most forbearant person in our town." And then he went back to his friend and he explained the whole story. But now the whole purpose of this story is not just for entertainment. It's not just to amuse us. The purpose of this story is for us to bring these kind of qualities into our life. So when we do get angry, it is obvious we might want to do something. We might do something which, for example, if we are a father and our child is irritating us again and again, we may get angry and feel the need to use your hand or whatever you want to control that child. But that is not going to be the answer. You will have to control that anger, forgive your child, and do good to him. Wallahu yuhibbul muhsinin. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves those who are good. And this verse is also telling us that if we have the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with us, then He will definitely make our lives easier. And for us to solve this problem in a better way will definitely be much easier. Why? Because the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is with us. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, Wallahu yuhibbul muhsinin, that Allah loves us. He loves those who do good. So if we are doing good to our child, to our wives, to our husbands, to our family members, to our friends, then that love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be with us. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will love us. So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves you, He will definitely help you get through that problem of yours. And He will definitely help you control that anger. It all works hand in hand. And another thing we need to keep in mind, that everybody has different temperament, everybody is different. Just because somebody done something, we should not immediately write them off and say, this person is so silly, how could he do something like that? Maybe to him something makes sense and to you it does not. But that does not mean you just write that person off straight away. If a person has an illness in him, you do not hate the person. If somebody, for example, has cancer, if somebody has AIDS, for example, we definitely hate cancer. Everybody hates AIDS, nobody wants it. But do you hate the patient who is sitting in the bed with cancer? Do you hate the person with AIDS? You don't hate the person, you hate that illness. So if you see someone who has disbelief in them, many of us may have friends who are not Muslim. That does not mean you hate them. You hate that disbelief in them, but you do not hate the person. You may have friends who commit sin day in, day out. Yes, you can have hatred for the sin, and it may even get you angry, but you do not hate that person. Because you do not know what the condition of that person will be at the time of death. He may die with Iman and you may not. He may die with Iman and you may not. And remember this. Just recently, I read an article of a European politician in, I think, Holland, if I'm not mistaken, who was amongst the people who made these, the films or something against Nabi Kareem Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So now look at how bad he must have thought of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and of Islam. And just as of late, this very same person has reverted to Islam. So can you imagine the remarks of all the Muslimin and the Mu'mineen at the time when all of these problems were happening? And naturally, everyone will get angry. But the key point here is to control that anger. And not make bad remarks and not backbite, because anger will lead to backbiting, slandering. It will lead you to just sit around and talk bad of people, and it will make you plot and do deceitful things, and it will make you very spiteful. Very, very spiteful. And it happens amongst family members even, where out of spite they will plot and do things against the person or against his child, and it will just cause so much harm and difficulty for that person, just because we didn't control this anger. So we should never look down on another person, whether he is a Muslim or not, because you do not know the condition of yourself in 10 days' time. You do not know the condition of yourself when you are on your deathbed. That person who may have been coming out of the pub 2 days ago might die with Iman. So out of anger and spite, you were saying this and that, but you do not know your end state, and you do not know his or her end state. So it is very important that we, as mu'mineen, as believers, always maintain the moral high ground. Always maintain the moral high ground. And control all of these illnesses that we have in our hearts. Now the illnesses of the heart are many. It is not just anger. But out of anger many things come. You get pride, hatred, malice, jealousy. All of these things are such which we need to control. Shaykh Ashraf Ali Thanwi rahimahullah of the Indian subcontinent says that to eradicate these illnesses of the heart is impossible. To eradicate the illnesses of the heart is impossible. But what we can do is try to control and channel them in the right direction. Try to control and channel these illnesses into the right direction. So, because if we try to get it straight out of our hearts, or think that it's actually possible to take anger out of your heart, then you are indirectly challenging the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created you with anger. Indirectly. So, we can try to control and channel this anger or any other illness of the heart in the right direction. This is what we need to work towards. And at times, when we are in a predicament, when we are in a problem, then try to think level-headedly. It also comes in another hadith, wherein Nabi Karim sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, if you are angry, this is more of a psychological thing. If you are angry, if you are standing, then sit down. If you are standing, then sit down. Not the other way around. If you are sitting, then stand up. Because if we are sitting and we get angry, what's the first thing we do? We shoot up and stand up and start jumping and screaming. So if you are standing, sit down. And it goes even further by saying, if you are sitting down, then lie down. Because that anger which boils up inside us anger is like heat. It will rise. So if we try to control ourselves and sit down or lie down, then this anger will be kept under control. Another way to control anger, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, وَإِمَّا يَنْزَغَنَّكَ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ نَزْغٌ فَاسْتَعِذْ بِاللَّهِ. That when shaitan is provoking you and he is making you get angry, then what should you do? فَاسْتَعِذْ بِاللَّهِ. Seek refuge from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by saying, أَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ. Seek refuge from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So next time you're in a road rage, what should you do? Everyone's sleeping. Seek refuge from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Next time somebody makes you angry, seek refuge from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And going back to the issue of between husband and wife, they have many fights over small petty issues, over food, over this, over that. But what we should keep in mind is the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala where He says, وَعَاشِرُوهُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَعَاشِرُوهُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. That live with your women folk, hunna, referring to the women folk, bil-ma'ruf, with goodness. And ma'ruf is a very comprehensive word. Goodness is just the easy translation for it. So if we are oppressing or causing problems in our houses, then know you are going directly against the command of the Quran. Where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, وَعَاشِرُهُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. And just for a small problem, for example, like I said, there's too much or too less salt in the food. Now you want to kick up a big fuss about it. What if it was your daughter married to someone else and your son-in-law acted in the same way? How would you feel towards your daughter? So do you not think that your wife is somebody else's daughter? So control this anger. Control this anger of ours, and inshallah, with a lot of dua and the help and love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we will be able to get it under control. And our life will become much easier. And as the hadith said, our hearts will be filled with peace and tranquility, with wa iman, and it will be filled with faith, and it will strengthen our faith. So if we suppress our anger, inshallah, it will control many other evils which can come out of it. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first of all give me, then every one of you, the ability to suppress our anger, to control our anger, to understand the repercussions of the illnesses of the heart, and do not take it for granted. All of these things are very important in our day-to-day life. And as I said before, do not wait and think that when I'm 40 or 50, that's when I'll start living, or that's when I'll start practicing, or that's when I will start, once I save up my money, that's when I will live my life. Because every day that goes by is part of your life. So again, we make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He gives us the ability to practice upon whatever has been said. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi.